Hi, it's Dave from Doing Things with Dave. And it's been a minute since my last video. But I've been busy since my Panama Canal cruise. Mostly work, but I did just embark from an 8-day Thanksgiving cruise to the Bahamas. The cruise was on the NCL Breakaway, a ship I've sailed on once before. We left from New York City on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. Now, I personally love sailing from New York since it's a very easy trip to the cruise port. I drive from home to the Weehawken ferry terminal, take the ferry across the Hudson River, and then walk past the Intrepid to the Manhattan cruise port. Takes me about 30 minutes from the time I park to the time I'm at the cruise port. The ferries, by the way, are the same ones that rescued passengers from the U.S. Air flight that crashed in the river back in 2009, the Sully story. So embarkation was relatively easy, although the announcements for boarding were not done so well or consistently or clearly, so there was a bit of a minor delay, a little confusion to get on the ship. But by 12:30, I was on and immediately grabbed lunch and taste, one of the main dining rooms on the ship. Now, pro tip, when you get on board any cruise ship, the first thing you want to do is get your muster drill out of the way, and it's an e-muster, so it's almost always very simple. Then head to one of the main dining rooms for lunch. You'll have a good meal in a very relaxed setting, and the transition from the hustle and bustle to vacation mode goes very quickly. And try to avoid the craziness of the buffet. Now, the lines, the number of cruisers, and almost everyone has a carry-on bag. It's a recipe for frustration, if not some spilled food. Anyway, sail away was low-key. Since it was already dark by the time we left, it was after 5 p.m., and I've sailed from New York a few times, so I decided instead of trying to go out on one of the decks, I'd stay inside one of the inside bars and have a few beers, meeting some of my fellow cruisers. And it was a pretty solid, especially since the folks I met on literally the first hour or two of the cruise, I spent the whole week hanging out with, having dinner, having drinks, watching games. So it was a really great way to start the cruise. And another pro tip, the great thing about cruising, and for me, cruising solo, is you can do whatever you want, but you certainly can meet a lot of different people. You can choose the time and place that you want to hang out with them, spend some time with them. Obviously do what makes you happy, but you might end up meeting some folks that either are your great cruise friends or become real friends for real life. So whatever makes you happy, do it. Now, I did, before we left the river, get a picture of the Statue of Liberty at night, but ultimately the day was a low-key one. Went to bed early, and I was really looking forward to the rest of the cruise. Now, as I mentioned, it was an 8-day cruise over Thanksgiving. So after our departure day, we had 2 sea days south, then 2 Bahama ports, Nassau and Great Stirrup Cay, 1 Florida port, Cape Canaveral, on Thanksgiving Day itself, and then 2 sea days home. Now, I knew when I booked this cruise, the port days were not super exotic, but cruising out of New York in the late fall means a few sea days to get south. So I was excited to have a couple of days in the sun, some sand, some beautiful weather, an opportunity to relax. Plus, as crazy it may sound, on Cruise 13, Nassau was a new port for me. And of course, Port Canaveral was as well, although I have been to the Kennedy Space Center. I've been in that area, but never at the cruise port. Now, the first 2 sea days south were relaxing. We had really calm seas, and the weather continued to get warmer as we cruised further south. By the afternoon of day 1, it was nice enough for shorts and drinks outside at the bars and the waterfront. And here's the thing, the vibes were high. Everyone was in a good mood. The crew was great. They were solid. They were friendly. They seemed really excited. And everyone was having a good time. Now, the next sea day was kind of the same, a little bit warmer. And finally, it was time to dock in Nassau. Now, Nassau was crazy. There were a total of 6 ships. Us, 1 from Carnival, the Carnival Celebration, and 4 from Royal Caribbean. Two of the four were Utopia and Wonder of the Seas, and then the other two I don't quite remember, but approximately 25,000 passengers amongst those ships, plus another 10, 15,000 crew. It's a lot of people. But I have to say, I really enjoyed Nassau. I've heard all sorts of terrible things about Nassau, never get off the ship, etc., etc. I enjoyed myself. What I did, I'm glad I got off. I went to Junkanoo Beach. I walked down there, hung out for a little while, went in the water. I went to the Pirate Museum. I walked around a little, did a little shopping, and then had a few local Sands beers and some cracked shrimp. 10 out of 10 recommend. Plus, it ended up being the real only port day we had. More to come on that. Okay, so another pro tip is go ahead and get off the ship in every port. Sometimes just walk around, explore a bit, have a bite to eat or a local beer. And yeah, you can stay on that cruise ship, but you never know what the next day is going to bring. Get off, explore, come back on, have a good time. But remember, if the next day doesn't happen, you might have regretted not getting off the ship. So, back to Nassau and back on the ship. When I got back on, the rumors were starting to make themselves appear. We might be skipping the next port, the Great Stirrup Cay. Great Stirrup Cay is, or Great Stirrup Cay is NCL's private island. It's a place I've been a few times. I really enjoy it. Great swimming. The bars are cool. The beach is great. But I've also been on a ship where we had to skip it. Now, Great Stirrup Cay is currently a tender port. And that means instead of docking at the pier, you actually have to take a small boat, a tender, to and from the ship back to the island. Now, occasionally, because of weather, wind, or high waves, you will skip a tender port. And like I said, that's happened to me once before. It is what it is. You have a sea day and you move on. But we were hearing that it was going to be canceled. Now, the weather was absolutely beautiful in Nassau. And the forecast for the next day was also really good weather. Almost no wind, no sea, beautiful sun. So, head scratching. Now, around 6 p.m., the cruise director came on the loudspeaker and confirmed, shared the news. We would not be going to GSC because of the weather. But wait, the captain came on a few minutes later for his announcement. And it was different. Yes, we were skipping GSC, but the reason he gave was because there was work in the tender area. Now, NCL is building a pier there, finally. And it was supposed to be done already. It was supposed to be done in the middle of November. But it's not. So our port day was canceled for work needs. So, yeah, it is what it is. Except I think NCL could have done a much better job to communicate this to cruisers. Now, I'm pretty confident that before we even boarded the ship, they knew that we were going to have to skip this port. And I've heard, again, rumors, that the island is going to be closed, meaning they're not going to dock there or tender there, or I should say anchor and tender, until they finish the work, and ideally that's in early January. Now, I think that's okay, right? Get it done. It'll be great once it's finished. But it's really frustrating with cruisers like me and our cruise, only with a few ports on the itinerary and not being transparent early in the process. And I've also would have liked to see NCL maybe do something with a little bit of goodwill for everyone impacted. Now, I want to be super clear. Cruise contracts are very clear. Ports can be canceled for any reason. Safety, of course, weather, other issues. And this is clearly another issue. This is a work issue. But I think what would have been nice, a good gesture, is one of a couple of ideas. One, give a small amount of onboard credit. Not a lot, $25 or $50. Maybe as a token of thanks for, hey, understanding we know this didn't work out the way you wanted. Or even better, maybe a future cruise credit. Maybe a little bit more, maybe $50 or $100. Again, a small amount, but a gesture of good faith. Now, the advantage of that is, instead of having to give everyone a little bit of onboard credit, you give the future cruise credit. Some people will take advantage of that. They'll feel a little bit better about the bad experience, knowing that, hey, these things happen, but NCL is doing the right thing, but it's not going to be a big negative hit for NCL because people are still going to cruise and they're still going to spend money on the cruise ship. So it was an opportunity, I think, for them to do something a little bit better. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this? Put a comment below whether you agree that they should have done something, that, hey, cruise contract is what it is, cruiser beware, or some other thought. So, as I mentioned, we had 3 ports: Nassau, GSC, and Port Canaveral. But only Nassau was like the real port day, because when we got to Port Canaveral, that was on Thanksgiving in the U.S., and a port that's really just a parking lot, parking garages, and places for ships like Disney and Carnival, and nothing. Now, I did take a nice walk over to the marina, but guess what? It was Thanksgiving. Nothing was open except for a bait shop in the morning. When I walked back a little bit later, it was closed. But the other thing was every single person had to get off the ship and do an immigration check. And nobody could get back on until every single person had completed the check. Which, if you've ever cruised, I'm sure you can imagine how much that was. That sucked. People were tired. There was not a whole lot of place to sit. The weather was weird. Long lines, frustrated people. They want to get back on the ship. It's Thanksgiving. The staff at the cruise port obviously didn't want to be there either. So it was a recipe for a lot of frustration, annoyance, especially on the back of canceling GSC the day before. Now, I do want to say one thing about the impromptu sea day. The weather was absolutely beautiful. Everyone, I think, had a wonderful time, as best as we could, when we should have been at the island, but we still had a really nice day, sea day-wise. But again, 2 days in a row of no good port action on a cruise that's 8 days long but only has 3 ports creates a bit of tension and frustration. Deep breaths, though, because it was Thanksgiving. And the cruise line did a nice job in terms of making it a Thanksgiving experience. Really good food, especially in the buffet. But it was also Football Thursday. We had 3 games. So a lot of us gathered in places like Oceans, which, if you've been on NCL ships, Oceans or the Local is sort of the 24-hour sports pub with some TVs, bars, bar food, good drinks, good times. Crowded, but it was a good time. And then they also played some of the games up on the H2O Spice, the adults only area, on the bigger screen there. Another bar, no food, but again, good time. Making, if you will, lemonade out of lemons. And what was nice is I did have dinner in the buffet with some of my cruise friends. It was a good meal, certainly Thanksgiving-y, big turkey. Didn't have as many sides as you might like, but all in all, the food was really good, and the day ended well. Now, as for my walk, my parking lot excursion, I had a nice stroll. And I did see an alligator. So basically, it was like a wildlife safari. Now, not quite the one I had in Costa Rica earlier in April, but still a cool and fun story, and able to show folks the alligator. Everyone was shocked because the pond that it was in was so small. Plus, I got to watch some pelicans dive bombing fish in the harbor. So all in all, it was still a bit of good experience. Now, the next 2 sea days, low-key, although a little chilly, certainly as we got further north, so the outdoor space became less appealing. And the reality is everyone was inside, so seating was a bit limited, certainly a bit of a premium, but everybody was cool. People were getting up, sharing, and at the end of the day, having a good time, right? We're still on a cruise. Eventually, it was time to say goodbye, and everyone was pretty positive. Now, for me, leaving was super fast and easy. And because we'd already done customs in Florida, literally got off the ship and walked out of the terminal, walked past the Intrepid again, down to the ferry. I was off the ship by 8:15 in the morning, and I was home before 10 a.m. Can't beat that. So, my final thoughts on this cruise. Is an 8-day Thanksgiving cruise out of NYC worth it? Sure. I would do it again. But you got to be prepared for a couple of chilly sea days. And it's going to be sea day heavy to begin with because you're just not going to have a whole lot of time in the Bahamas, or if you can get even further to the Caribbean. But if you're localish, right, hour or two drive, so New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island, maybe even Pennsylvania or even Delaware, it's not a bad idea. You can save some time. Certainly don't have to fly. Certainly don't have to come in the night before. It's not very expensive if you know where to park. So definitely something to think about. Now, as I rate this specific cruise, this was number 13 for me and number 9 on Norwegian. Like I said, my second time on the Breakaway. Certainly was not my best or favorite cruise. Panama Canal, that takes the cake. But certainly wasn't my worst cruise either. That was my Carnival cruise, and I really did not like that experience. But due to a couple skip port days, or I should say one skip port day and the Thanksgiving Day stop, it's probably in the bottom 5. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. More content is coming, and I've got some more adventures, including more cruising, planned. So if you like the video, maybe like, subscribe. And anyway, have a great day, and I will see you on the sea.